So I understand that there's been a couple of developments this past week, one involving a certification from a pretty substantial organization. You want to share any new things with us?
Yeah, we're pleased to announce that we've completed the certification of blockchain and our B-Certs concepts. I, in particular, with a few of the more exciting and innovative models with Oxford University out of London. So we completed the Oxford blockchain certification in the inaugural certification program there, which is really exciting to have that prestigious institution, as well as what we had previously with MIT and our fintech. So again, it always gives a good feeling of third-party validation, especially when it comes from the leading thinkers out there in the world.
And not only that, we already have a certification through MIT. You want to talk a little bit about that? Because I don't think we've ever explained on a Ask Me Anything exactly what that entailed.
Yeah, so in 2016, when Blockcerts was first conceived, we had already, as we've talked about on this, established the fintech platform and a lot of the tools that we now are able to use for our workflows, smart contracts, supply chain, all the things you're hearing about. And that project, that core, we call it, went through the MIT FinTech program in the fall of 2016. We certified it. It was one of the leading capstone projects out of MIT. And that's really where all the Blockcerts platform started. As we were developing, how would you create blockchain so people could actually use it and implement it as a platform in the world?
Well, that's very interesting because that leads us into the first question I got from Herb. And Herb wants to know, how did you come up with the name Blockcerts?
Well, blockchain, Blockcert, Bitcoin, all of that kind of was evolving back in the early days, say 2013, 2014. I was in Silicon Valley and I started looking around at what all the different wallet applications were that were being developed, what was happening with Bitcoin, what Ripple was doing. And what I realized by 2016 was, at the end of the day, everything that goes on the blockchain is going to have to be certified. It's going to have to be authenticated. You're going to have to, regardless of what you do with it or where it goes, to make it valid, you're going to have to know and be 100% assured on what the people are or who the people are that you're dealing with and what the project, contract, commodity is that's going through it. So Blockcerts came from there. It was an idea that the blockchain hashing algorithm, the distributed ledger with a certification to be 100% assured that that's who you're dealing with was going to be important. And certainly we can see that today. There's been a lot of problems with Bitcoin and blockchain with anonymity in the early days, the Silk Road, money laundering things and all of that. So when it goes into mainstream business, certification is going to be critical. That's a big part of immutable trust, and that's where the name Blockcerts came from. So B-Cert tokens is Blockcerts tokens.
Cool. Alice from La Jolla has been reading up on blockchain, and she said one of the things that she thinks could be very valuable in blockchain is losing a lot of the middlemen, all of the intermediaries that are involved in transactions. Could you explain how that can happen?
Yeah, the middleman is probably the biggest disruption of blockchain on the planet, really, and it's trillions. You're exactly right. It's going to be a $1 trillion transfer, multi-trillion dollar transfer of resources from what happens through aggregation. And it becomes pretty fundamental. Who do we think of as middlemen? And, how do we think of it is going to be a really big evolution in everything from our food supply to our healthcare to our private information. And I'll give you three examples that you'll understand. Is Facebook a middleman hosting all of your information between you and your family and your friends? Sure they are. And you've seen what happens with that information. So that's centralization. There's another one we've talked about previously, middlemen in pharmacy called PBMs, or pharmacy benefit managers, where payments between the pharmacy, the healthcare, insurance companies, the hospital, the prescriptions going from the doctor to the patient, that middleman cost alone in just the United States every year is around $500 billion, or $500 billion, which is 1/3 of the expense of the U.S. healthcare system. So middlemen are incredibly expensive. In India and Africa, when you look at the food supply chain, where over 1/3 of the actual food comes from small suppliers, it's all aggregated through distributors or middlemen. And as a result of that aggregation process, the World Economic Forum estimates that 20 to 40% of all food gets wasted. Economic business, agriculture business estimates it at 59%. So before it ever can even be used, it gets wasted through spoilage, rot, inefficient distribution systems. And that's just to start. The World Economic Forum estimates that if we eliminated that, it would add, get this, $2.5 trillion to the global GDP, not to mention how many people we could feed. So truly, you could solve world hunger, and that's always been a bit of a myth in the world. But the reality is, systems are changing. We have technology. We're not using it efficiently. Blockchain allows us to do that. And that's how we eliminate middlemen. We just simply bring the supply chain and the supplier or the end user much closer to where they're trying to get to, which is the person on the other side, in an authenticated fashion with trust.
Great. We've got a gentleman named Harim. And Harim read your white paper that we put out a couple months ago, and he had a question relating to what you describe as the open structure organization. And his question is, since we seem to be moving to a more decentralized economy, can you explain how that will fit corporate structure in the future?
Yeah. First of all, the open structure organization was something I did research when I was at the University of Victoria as a professor. And the idea of open structures has been around for a long time in regard to capitalism and democracy. And it was actually first published in the 1950s by Robert Dahl in a book called Polyarchy. And polyarchy states that rather than having a centralized authority with a few decision makers, we could have a decentralized authority with multiple decision makers. And since then, without getting into political science, a lot of work's been done from Oxford to Cambridge to Yale to just about every academic institution that focuses on this stuff about how structures can be more efficient when you're including the interests and the governance of multiple stakeholders. So what happens with the open structure organization, and if you look at kind of the evolution of what's happening with work today and business today, is we're seeing distributed work all over the world. We're seeing what's been termed the gig economy, where especially the millennial generation are working not for one company, but for many, or within a field of expertise that they then contract out to many. You look at corporations out there and companies that have done an amazing job of employing people like Upwork, who had I don't know what the exact stat is now, but they were growing at about 30% year over year in freelance workers when the economy of jobs was flat in the United States. So that's polyarchy. It's evolving and it's becoming a reality. It was looked at by the academics and the thinkers some 20, 30 years ago, not unlike blockchain, actually. And what's happening now is we're seeing it all emerge, and merge because technology is now available to actually implement this stuff. We can eliminate middlemen. We can make things faster, more efficient. We've got a computer in our hand every day, and so does the rest of the world. We've got the ability to work from anywhere. We've got this complete flexibility. We've got the ability to work in any time zone and still contribute our talents and collaborate. And now with blockchain, we have the ability to track all of that, authenticate it, certify it, and be assured that nobody's going to mess with the data, or that the person that we're working on the other side with is authentic. And so we can start trusting the system we've created. Open structure organization looks at corporate governance and says, now how are we going to adopt that? How are we going to profit from it? And the way we're going to profit from it, it's going to change everything. Equity will no longer be, I own shares. It's going to be stakes. And stakes in blockchain are broken down to tokens. Tokens are the model that drives the blockchain, that makes it bigger, and that's called a proof of stake model. So there's consensus, there's proof of stake, there's the blockchain, and there's all these now structures that have been studied for decades that are now able to be implemented. That's what the open structure is founded around.
Great. A follow-up question, you were just talking about tokens, and Christopher was asking, could you describe the difference between what's called a security token and what's called a utility token?
Sure. A security token is more like a share of stock. It's more like an interest in gold or silver. It basically is a store of value, and that value, as we've seen in cryptocurrencies and things like that, goes really way through these massive fluctuations. That's one kind of security token, and that's for something that's, say, already developed and out there, like Bitcoin or Ethereum or Ripple. XRP, which is Ripple. Then you have another type of security token, which is, here's a white paper, and we're going to issue some tokens. Well, that's an idea. You're basically then investing in a security that's an idea. And in the United States, that idea has to be registered as a security. And that's what the big issues are with those kinds of projects that happened in 2017, is most of them didn't register. So they were selling securities without being registered under the laws of the US. That varies drastically from a utility token. A utility token is already built. It already has functionality. It can already do the things that it says it can do at that point in time, and you can use it for something. That's Blockcerts. We can issue Blockcerts tokens today. We can give them to any party. They can authenticate between each other. They can communicate on a private, secure network between each other, and they can have a record of all of that that's immutable, so they can trust and they can protect their communication. They can protect what files they share. They can do all of that. That's a utility token. So utility means exactly what it says. Can I use it for something? It's a piece of technology I can use. A security is either something I think I can build, and maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. That's a high-risk security. And the other is a store of value that's already out there, like Bitcoin, mining and things like that. And that's a store of value as well, with high volatility, because it doesn't really do anything other than hold that value, and values based on what the market attributes, just like in the stock market. It's driven by what they always say is greed and emotion. So,
greed and emotion. Say, Stephen had a follow-up question. He works for a startup, and he says, can you see startups in the future using token sales or security tokens to fund companies?
I think that that's a given. The just this last week, venture capitalists started formally adopting blockchain and announcing they're going to adopt blockchain. The European Union, 23 countries, I think, in the European Union signed a blockchain accord. I think what you're going to see is securities that are on the blockchain and that are token based for many reasons. One, it's a lot smarter than current securities market. I don't need a broker. Again, what's a broker but a middleman? So these giant financial institutions that have built these big barriers to entry to the capital markets will eventually be disintermediated, and eventually we'll see regulations a lot more friendly to something that can literally be trusted trusted a lot more maybe than a brokerage firm. Can you say Lehman Brothers? So of course, blockchain gives you that ability. Now the regulations have to catch up with it. But I don't think there's any question that we'll see tokenized equity offerings on a broad scale in the future. And that's why it's paramount to start looking today at what's the future going to look like with the fundamentals of blockchain, and what's the rails or the platform going to be that's out there that can facilitate that.
Great. I had a question from Carol, and Carol was asking, you talk a lot about business applications for blockchain. Are there any applications for a personal blockchain?
Well, I actually think every application is personal on the blockchain. The first thing that we talk about is the authentication, or authentication meaning this is me. So if I have my security of my authenticated identity, then a lot of issues start becoming the control or the domain of my own private information and my own life. And that's absolutely critical because we're wrapping our lives with data. Again, as we saw with Facebook, as we saw with Equifax, who's taking our data about us, and we don't even authorize Equifax to do it. At least on Facebook, we're voluntarily posting it. But many people don't know this. Under Armour had a big hack, and I can't remember if it was 100 or 150 million people got affected on their health record, or that they were using on some app that Under Armour has. So this is an ongoing issue, and I think it is very personal. What happens from there is, how do I take that authentication and use it? Am I using it to secure private information I only want to share with my family and friends? Am I using it in my work life and controlling my work life records there? Am I using it for finance and healthcare records that I want to keep private to myself? How am I using that authentication is more the question, not if authentication and privacy is important on the blockchain. That's your key to having faith and confidence and trust in using these tools as they become more broadly dispersed throughout the world. It also protects that identity. So if somebody doesn't have that key, they can't be you. They can't become you. Think about that. So, do you want somebody else to be acting as you when your self-driving car is going down the road at 70 miles an hour? I don't think so. Maybe you don't want to take that sharp left turn into the wall. So it becomes really, really personal. I think blockchain is probably the most personal technology we've had out there yet, and it puts the control where it belongs and has to be, which is in your hand.
Great. Now we're back to business. Keith runs a small business, and he said he's read in the newspapers about big companies like big shipping companies and jewelry manufacturers and people like that getting on the blockchain, using blockchain in their business. He says, what about the small business guy? Are they going to be able to utilize it, or is the technical challenge going to be just too big to overcome?
Well, that's the main focus of Blockcerts. We want to distribute Blockcerts so it can go down to what I call the lowest common denominator, which is the individual. And nothing happens without people. So the answer is the idea of industry and creating this kind of person to action to supply in the world of services and products all revolves around one thing. What do we individually do with our lives? So a small business needs to be able to service its business interests and its customers on the same level playing field as the big businesses. But going back to something like supply chain, that hasn't been built. It hasn't been in the interest of these large organizations to build these widely distributed apps because they're protecting their big license fees and user fees and things like that with their big customers. And blockchain disintermediates that in technology specifically and says, no, you don't get to control all that anymore. We're going to bring it down to the individual level. So very much it affects the small business, and small business is the focus of the majority of the economy. Small businesses generate more than 90% of the jobs in the world today. So our mission at Blockcerts is to make sure that small business first is the mandate, to make sure that it's accessible and put blockchain into the hands of the small businesses, who then can say, here, now big business, big technology company, you can have our business, but on our terms.
Great. We have one final question, and that's from Carolyn. And Carolyn is asking, she sees this thing on her screen that says smart contracts. She was asking if you could explain what a smart contract is and how it works.
A smart contract, let's take a really simple example of what blockchain is. So blockchain is like a group text message. When I do a text message with a group of people, say 5 people, I've got Jay and Bob and Dan and Tim, and we're all on this group message, and I do a text, there's a receipt, and you've seen this come up on your phone, which is, oh, it was delivered. Oh, it was read. So you know that that group's happening, and that data is now there. So if I delete something on my phone or I remove that message, it doesn't remove it from everybody else's phone. They still have it. That's what the blockchain does. So it's recording everything. A smart contract takes the terms of a contract. So we're all familiar with contracts, whether it be a mortgage term or mortgage terms for our homes or business terms for our vendors or what have you. And it takes those terms, and within those terms, it's going to record those, and it's going to record everything that happened in getting to that contract, as well as everybody signing off with their authenticated block certification onto that contract, and those terms are now recorded on the blockchain. It'll go one step further by executing. So if a payment needs to be made as a certain event occurs, payment will get made. It will get distributed. If there's a problem with that, everybody's notified, and immediately it stops, or there's a procedure for handling what anomaly happened with this smart contract. So no longer do you say, no, I didn't say that, or that didn't work. It literally is smart. It's smart business. It's a smart contract. It works within the flow of the way contracts actually work. That's why we call it transaction streaming. Contracts don't have this one-page PDF, I sign it, one and done life. Actually, as you sign a contract, a paper contract, that's when everything else happens. And so really what we're doing is we're going from this concept of kind of like what we used to do with a mobile phone, which is just make a phone call, to what we do today with a smartphone like an iPhone, with all these apps and all these interactions we can do right from the same device, because things continue, contracts continue. So think of a contract like it starts as a platform on the contract, and everything else from payment to customer service to building that relationship so we can go into a new contract to, modifying the terms, to all the things that happen with contract and business happening in that smart contract environment. It becomes a platform for you to build on that relationship of why you're entering in that contract in the first place.
And I said that was a final question, but I lied, because we did have a follow-up to that question, and that is, do you provide the smart contracts, or do I have to come up with my own smart contracts?
The answer is the first iteration is we're going to provide smart contract templates to get the idea that this is how smart contracts can work. But anybody can build a smart contract. You can do it in a number of ways. You can provide a contract and convert it. It's converted into a smart contract with the terms that are the most critical to execute. You can, in the second version, you'll just be able to literally drag and drop your contract in and sign it and send it around for signature and get the execution of all these automations done that way. So the answer is both. Today, we're creating templates and we're making it easy and seamless for people to use those templates. If somebody has a specific use case, then they will come to us and they'll say, this is my use case, and here's how I do my business today, and we'll convert that to a smart contract. In the future, what will happen is smart contracts will become smarter too, because you'll be able to get templates from thousands or millions of people around the world in every jurisdiction that matches the regulation, that matches what has to happen. Think of real estate or land registries or healthcare or whatever. Smart contract environment, I predict, will become huge, just like apps did. And you'll be able to search, that one fits me the closest, I want to tweak this here and here and here, boom, I have a smart contract. So it will be much like the App Store. Today it's starting out with templates and the ability to convert what you're doing today in the analog kind of, think of going to Blockbuster to pick up a CD versus what Netflix does today. And that's why we call it transaction streaming. You're going to be able to stream these. You're going to be able to access what you need and do exactly what you want to do without having to walk into the store and see that your favorite CD's out of inventory. That's why Netflix won. That's why transaction streaming is going to replace emailing PDFs and sharing files by email.
You mean I can't go down to Blockbuster and rent a video anymore?
And I think I heard the last Blockbuster shut down.
Oh, darn. You can tell I don't get out much.
Exactly.
But I was talking to a business person the other day, and I said, well, you already use contracts in your business, right? And he goes, well, yeah, I've got vendor contracts, I've got purchasing contracts, I've got non-disclosures, I've got all kinds of things that I have people sign. I said, well, if you could just upload those so that they were on tap for you whenever you needed to use one, and then you could shoot one over to somebody and send them a token, and they authenticated themselves, and then they could go in and take care of their part of the contract. Wouldn't that be a lot easier than trying to everyone keep copies of their own contract and scanning and faxing and all that? And the light bulb went on for him. And
it goes even one step further. Once you've signed that contract, where do you store it?
Right.
How do you access it? What are you supposed to do? What if you forget to do something? What if you honestly forget to do something? There's no smarts to it. All we did is go from paper to PDF. So all we really did is sped up the process. Like we sped up the process when we were able to take paper and send it by FedEx. Then we went to fax, and then we went to PDF. Smart contracts and blockchain is just the next smart evolution of where technology can take us today. And you don't want to keep going through and looking through multiple places where data is stored to try and find your work. You just want to click, boom, go. I'm done. This is what's supposed to happen. Or get a reminder. This is what's supposed to happen. Oh, yeah. Or even beyond a reminder, it just does it. What's the overhead of a small business, or any business for that matter? How does that reduce the overhead? It's going to be billions. That's why blockchain is being pushed so much. It's a new paradigm, everything from organizational structure to actual operations. And transaction streaming will change everything that we've ever thought about that we thought was easier. It's going to become more seamless than you've ever seen in the past in history.
Well, on that note, I think that makes a good conclusion to this Ask Me Anything webinar. Thanks, Tim, for joining.
Well, thank you for the good questions. Keep them coming. It's always great to be here every Friday and to answer whatever can be thrown at us about blockchain or what's happening in the world today. It's an exciting time.
Yeah, I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and don't forget, you can send us questions during the week. So if you're not going to be here for the next Ask Me Anything, but you have something that you need answered, send us an email or send us a question, or go on to our Blockcerts.com website and go through chat. There's all kinds of ways to get a hold of us, but we'll always be happy to answer your questions. And the best questions we save for Ask Me Anything, and we'll make sure we ask them. Each of these Ask Me Anything webinars is recorded. You can go to our Blockcerts.com webpage, and there is a place where you can actually access these as a podcast. So you can download the old Ask Me Anythings if you have more questions or you just want more information.
Great. Well, thanks, Jake. Thanks, and enjoy the weekend, everybody. It's sunny where I'm at, so I hope it's sunny where you are.
Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next week for Ask Me Anything.